Erika Kirk stood before a stadium of mourners and a world watching and said 3 searing words about the man accused of killing her husband. I forgive him. In an hour loaded with grief and headlines, that one sentence landed like a bell tolling over the noise. A gospel note struck in public pain before tens of thousands in the arena and millions more online. Luke, chapter 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Brothers and sisters, those weren't soft words spoken from a safe place. They were hammered out on a cross, where the Son of God chose mercy in the mouth while nails were still in his hands. And tonight we hold that mercy beside a widow's courage. Why would a believer say what Erika said? Why would anyone step toward forgiveness when wounded so deeply? Because Christian forgiveness is not pretending evil is small. It is proclaiming that vengeance is God's, not mine. That justice belongs in the courts, not in my fists. That hatred will not be the architect of my future. Erika modeled this publicly, even as legal proceedings continue. Mercy in the heart, truth in testimony, and cooperation with the law. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. Loving an enemy does not mean calling an enemy a friend. It means refusing the gravity of hatred that pulls you into the same pit. It means praying, Father, do what only you can do. Judge justly, save powerfully, restrain evil, heal my heart. Love of enemy is not a denial of danger. It is a refusal to let danger define your soul. That is why forgiveness is not weak. It's warfare. Warfare against bitterness, cynicism, and the slow corrosion of the heart. What forgiveness is, and what it isn't. Forgiveness releases vengeance to God. It does not deny harm, erase wisdom, or suspend consequences. To forgive is to hand the gavel to heaven while still telling the truth to the judge on earth. To forgive is to lay down your private right to retaliate while picking up your public duty to cooperate with justice. Forgive freely. Testify truthfully. Mercy is personal. Justice is public. Release revenge, not responsibility. A soft heart doesn't mean soft on crime. Luke, chapter 17, verses 3 and 4. Jesus tells us to confront and, where there is repentance, to forgive again and again. Notice the balance, confrontation and compassion. The Christian way is not silence toward evil. It's truth spoken without poison. Erika's words at that memorial sounded like that balance. She did not rewrite the police report. She rewrote what rage would do to her heart. She named the horror, and then she named the Lord over it. And the world could hardly look away. Let's talk about the Lord's Prayer logic. Matthew chapter 6, verses 14 and 15. Jesus roots our forgiveness of others in the staggering fact that God has forgiven us. A forgiven people become a forgiving people. That doesn't mean your stomach stops twisting, your hands stop shaking, or your tears dry by Tuesday. It means your will points in a new direction. I will not repay evil with evil. I will not let this wound be my map. I belong to Jesus. He will be my map. Some of you protest, honestly, and I'm glad you do. If I forgive, am I betraying the person I lost? Am I betraying myself? No. Forgiveness is not betrayal. It is obedience to the one who knows every hair on the head you're grieving. Forgiveness doesn't certify that the offender is safe. It certifies that your heart is under new management. Forgiveness is not a shortcut around sorrow. It is a direction through it with Jesus leading. Now hear how forgiveness and justice walk together. Matthew chapter 22, verse 21. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. Render to Caesar. File the report. Speak to investigators. Give clear testimony. Set protective boundaries. Accept restraining orders. Appear at hearings. Render to God. Surrender vengeance. Intercede in prayer. Refuse to fantasize about retaliation, and ask for the miracle of a softened heart. The cross teaches us to keep these two realms distinct without splitting our soul. God's mercy can reign in your chest while the magistrate does his duty in the courthouse. That is not compromise. That is Christian integrity. Let's say it plain with some anchor lines you can carry into the week. Forgive freely. Testify truthfully. Mercy is personal. Justice is public. Release revenge, not responsibility. A soft heart doesn't mean soft on crime. But how do you practice this when the wound still bleeds? First, name the wound without spin. Write it down. Tell a counselor, a pastor, a trusted friend. Truth is the soil where real forgiveness grows. Second, aim your will before your feelings. Say, Father, in Jesus' name, I release my claim to revenge. I ask you to judge justly. Your feelings may lag a long time. That does not make your obedience a lie. It makes it a seed. Third, pray for the offender as an act of spiritual warfare, not sentimental denial. Lord, confront them, restrain them, save them if you will. When Erika said, I forgive him, she was not grading the accused man's progress. She was declaring the Lord's governance over her pain. Fourth, cooperate with safety and the law. If you're in danger, seek shelter. If you need a restraining order, get it. If you need therapy, begin. If there is a trial, tell the truth every time you're asked. Your mercy does not undercut your testimony. Your testimony does not undercut your mercy. Fifth, keep short accounts with God. When anger surges back, and it will, take it to the cross again. Picture your hands opening. Picture the gavel in God's hand, not yours. Say it out loud if you must. Vengeance is yours. Justice is yours. My heart is yours. There's a reason that first Christian sermon in blood, Father, forgive them, still shakes the earth. Forgiveness is the victory parade of a king who conquered sin and death. It does not declare evil harmless. It declares evil defeated. This is why the church could recognize Erika's act as a bright and costly witness, not a political act, a cruciform act, a public renunciation of revenge paired with a public submission to lawful justice. And yes, it happened in the glare of cameras so the internet could sneer or marvel. But the kingdom of God is not an algorithm. It is a king. Brothers and sisters, some of you came in tonight clenched by grief, strapped to a memory, or exhausted by a betrayal that won't stop replaying. In Christ, you are not asked to minimize what happened. You are asked to bring it to the cross where justice and mercy meet. The cross does not ask you to forget. It invites you to be free. So here is the invitation. Forgive from the heart. Set your will toward releasing revenge to God. Tell the truth. Cooperate fully with lawful justice. Pray for your enemies. Hand their story to the only judge who sees the whole tape. Begin healing tonight. Name the wound. Call a counselor. Ask trusted believers to carry you in prayer, and return again and again to Jesus' words. Father, forgive them. If you're ready, whisper this with me. Lord Jesus, I hand you my case. I will forgive. I will tell the truth. I will trust you with justice and with me. Guard my steps. Heal my heart. Amen. Preach is over. I have a story to tell you. The first punch I ever threw landed on the kitchen door, not a person. The wood split where the lock had already been loose for years, and my mother, Maria flinched like the door had bones. I told myself it was the house that made me angry. The roaches we named and then crushed. The burnt-out fuses. The landlord who cashed checks but never fixed the heat. I told myself it was the men who stared at my mother too long when she waited tables. The boys who laughed at my shoes. The envelope from the power company that came like winter. I kept a list of who I blamed, and I sharpened it daily. I didn't know a list like that is a knife you turn inward. I was quick with excuses and quicker with my temper. At school, I learned how to duck a punch and throw two back. At work, I bounced from job to job. I learned how to smile at customers and curse them the second the door chimed shut. At night, I learned how to sleep in pieces, like a window that won't quite latch. We lived in a part of the city where police sirens braided with lullabies, where kids measured the year by which mural got painted over, where names were remembered most when they were written on candles after something went wrong. The day everything broke had sun on it, which felt rude. I had been fired the afternoon before for being late too many times. My parole officer wasn't answering. My rent was due. In my pocket, I had $34, a bruised knuckle, and a lie I kept telling myself. You deserve a break. I walked the long way home, past a liquor store with bars on the glass and a pawn shop with guitars in the window. At the corner, there was a woman in a blue coat, small and steady, moving like her bones had a rhythm. I saw the purse. I saw the long strap. I saw a chance. You should know this. I had never held a gun before that week. I told myself it was just to scare people. I told myself no one would get hurt. The first lie you believe is always about harm. You say harm won't happen. You make plans that require harm to happen. Then you call it fate when harm shows up right on time. I stepped close. Don't scream, I said, because that's what men in movies say. I showed the gun like a business card. She froze, not with fear exactly. More like surprise, like someone hearing their name called when they're certain they're alone. I took the purse. I turned. I ran. I didn't think about how the strap would snap, how the receipts would scatter, how one picture would slide across the sidewalk face down and then catch on the wind so that when I looked back, I saw it flip and show me a little boy with a gap in his teeth. The cops were faster than my plan. A camera saw me. A squad car cut me off. And I learned how hard asphalt feels when your cheek shakes against it and a knee is between your shoulders. They counted my rights like beads. I nodded like a man who already knew the prayer. The blue coat woman stood at the corner holding her empty hands like they were evidence. She didn't look at me. I thought I wanted her to. I wanted someone to set me on fire so I could burn the part of me I hated. But she kept her eyes somewhere else. Maybe on the boy in the picture. Maybe on a future where his mother would not be afraid. County jail is a calendar with teeth. Days chew you down to sameness. Morning count. Lunch that tastes like steam. Afternoon echoes. Night noises. I thought anger would keep me warm, but numbness is a snow that sneaks in through the frame. I didn't have visitors. My mother's last text was 3 sentences, and each one felt like a hallway with a locked door. Mijo, I am praying. I can't come. Please don't be cruel to yourself. I was cruel anyway, just quietly, like a man holding his breath underwater to see how long he can last. My cellmate Tito talked more than I wanted. His laugh sounded like a chair scooting. He told me about a preacher he'd heard once at a small storefront church. The kind where the ceiling tiles are stained but the songs still go up, he said. Tito asked me if I believed in God. I told him I believed in gravity and bills. He shrugged like he was setting me down on a shelf and said, "Somebody believed in me once. It made me nervous. Then it made me different. I told him to let me sleep. The letter came on a Wednesday. The guard slid it through like it weighed nothing. My name, written in careful loops. Inside, a sheet of notebook paper and a little booklet I recognized from waiting rooms and bus stops. Thin, stapled, with a cross on the front. The letter was from the woman in the blue coat, Evelyn Hart. She wrote like she was speaking, not to the man who stole her purse, but to the man she was certain could still be found somewhere behind the ruin I had made. I'm a Christian, she wrote. Jesus teaches me to forgive. I am practicing that now. I don't say it lightly. You scared me. I feel wobbly when I think about it. But when I looked at your face, I saw a lost man. I've known lost men. Some became found. If you are willing, read the booklet I enclosed. It's from the gospel. Jesus' words, not mine. I'm willing to talk. I don't hate you. I won't lie for you. I want better for you than this. I put the letter down like it was hot. I told myself it was a trick. People try religion on you in here the way they try cigarettes, like they want company in their habit. But I read the booklet anyway, because my hands didn't know how to stop. It talked about sin like a diagnosis, and Jesus like a surgeon who operates on himself to save you. It quoted a line I remembered from somewhere. A king on a cross saying, "Father, forgive them." I closed it hard, like closing it would close his mouth. That night, I didn't sleep. I played the robbery in my head until the walls blurred. Her steps, my voice, the picture sliding on the sidewalk. I told myself I wasn't like the worst men in here. Then I remembered the boy in the photo losing his mother's wallet and learning another way men can be. I tried to pray, and the words got stuck behind my teeth. The first prayer I ever really prayed was short enough to fit in a cell. God, if you're there, I did this. I did this. I don't want to be the man who did this. Help me. Oh, nothing changed in the air. The fluorescent light still hummed like a tired wasp. My bunk still ached, but something unclenched, a fraction, like a fist loosening one finger. I didn't call it forgiveness yet. I called it not lying to myself for once. The next morning I asked for paper. I wrote Evelyn back. I wrote my mother too. To Evelyn I said I was sorry, which is not enough, but it is how a flood begins. With a crack in a dam. I told her I would cooperate with the law. I told the public defender everything in order. What I planned, what I did, what I told myself to make it feel reasonable. He looked at me like a man looking at a fire alarm finally pulled. This won't go easy, he said. I'm not asking for easy, I said. I'm asking for true. Tito slapped my shoulder and said, You look different. I said, I wrote a letter. He said, That'll do it. He invited me to the chapel service. I went because I didn't know what else to do with the ache. I went because I didn't know what else to do with the ache. The chapel sat inside the jail like a borrowed room. Drop ceiling, scuffed linoleum, a wooden cross someone sanded with love and cheap paper. 20 of us shuffled in, cuffs chattering like teeth. A volunteer with gray at his temples tuned a beat-up guitar until the strings stopped arguing. He didn't beg us to sing. He started soft. The words slipped past the bars, and somehow I felt like the ceiling was an open window. He read from Luke, about a father running to a son who wrecked his life and came home anyway. He didn't quote the whole story. He narrated it like he'd lived it. Then he lifted his eyes and said, Some of you think God is waiting with a clipboard. He's waiting with a robe. My heart tried to be stone. It felt more like wet dirt. When the service ended, I stayed. I told the volunteer about the letter. I didn't say her name. He listened like a doctor who knows the pain before the scan. "You can't unsay what happened," he said. "But you can tell the truth now and keep telling it. God can work with that." He prayed with me. I kept my eyes open because I didn't know how to shut them and trust at the same time. I wrote again that night. Evelyn first, then my mother, then my public defender. I told Evelyn that I would plead guilty, that I would accept whatever sentence came, that I would pay back what I stole dollar by dollar with interest if the court allowed. I asked her not for contact, not for mercy, just for the right to do right, even late. I told my mother I was sorry in ink that wouldn't come out even if tears fell on it. I told the defender there would be no games. "We'll cooperate," I said. He said, "You understand what you're giving up?" I said, "I understand what I already took." Weeks folded into a court date. The plea hearing smelled like paper and worry. The judge asked me questions that sounded like doors. "Do you understand? Are you choosing this? Is anyone forcing you?" I said yes to the first two and no to the last. The prosecutor read the facts with the calm of a weather report. I felt each sentence like hail. When the judge asked if the statement was true, I said it was. And for the first time in years, I felt clean and scared at the same time. Before sentencing, there was a moment I didn't expect. Through the victim liaison, Evelyn sent word that she had written a statement. I braced for heat, for rage I deserved. The liaison read it in a small room with a big clock. Evelyn described the fear, the months of waking to phantom footsteps, the way her son now crossed the street a little differently, how trauma teaches you to map every shadow. Then she said she was choosing forgiveness for the sake of her own soul, that she would not oppose a sentence tied to truth, that she wanted the law to do its work and God to do his. She asked that restitution be ordered and that I be offered programs that could make me different. When the liaison finished, I ran out of words. I whispered the only prayer I could find. "Lord, don't let me waste this." Sentencing came with numbers and terms and conditions. I received years that felt like a long hallway, but not a life. Probation after. Mandatory counseling. Restitution. A no-contact order unless a future program invited it with her permission. When the gavel fell, it sounded like the world deciding to keep turning. Prison is different than jail. It's a city with its own weather and customs. A place where time is a long river that erodes and sometimes irrigates. I signed up for everything with the word change in it. Substance classes, even though I wasn't using. Anger management, even though I thought my anger was management. Victim impact, even though I thought I knew impact. I learned the sentence "I was wrong" in every tense. I learned how to sit in silence without giving violence something to do. Some nights I unfolded Evelyn's letter until the creases started to go white. I didn't romanticize what she did. Forgiveness didn't make her safe. It didn't rebuild trust, but it pulled one nail out of the coffin I'd made of my heart. In Victim Impact, they showed us a video of a mother who looked into a camera and asked hard questions. Why did you choose my child? What did you tell yourself to make it okay? I wrote those questions in my notebook and answered them with my worst honesty. My reasons sounded like excuses, even when I wrote them slow. I crossed them out and wrote the real sentence. I wanted what wasn't mine, and I was willing to frighten someone to take it. On a Sunday, the chaplain offered communion. I sat, unsure if I belonged anywhere near bread that meant a broken body. I remembered a line I'd read in a little booklet. I looked it up in the Gospels to be sure I wasn't inventing it. Luke, chapter 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I didn't try to explain how I could be ignorant and guilty at the same time. I just stood up and got in line like a beggar who heard a rumor about bread. The chaplain placed a piece in my palm as if my hand were an altar. I said, "Thank you," and I meant it toward heaven. Change didn't move in a straight line. Some days I woke electric with hope. Some days I woke like a bruise. Tito, transferred months after me, wrote letters with jokes and scripture he couldn't quite quote. I wrote back with the exact words when I knew them and paraphrases when I didn't. One day, I copied a line that had become a lifeline when shame climbed on my chest. Luke, chapter 18, verse 13. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I prayed at morning count and lights out, before meals and whenever anger tried to make an old home in me. I worked in the kitchen and tried to be human in small ways. Extra ladle for the man who hadn't had visitors in years. A seat saved for the guy everyone avoided. An apology when my voice climbed a fence. A volunteer told me once, "Service is the gym where love builds muscle." I didn't feel strong, but I did reps. Near the end of my term, the case manager asked if I'd consider a restorative dialogue with Evelyn. Only if she wanted. Only with mediators. Only if the no contact order was formally amended for this one session. The question moved through the system like a cautious bird. Weeks passed. Then word came back. She was willing to try. We met in a room without sharp edges. Two mediators sat like calm weather between us. I had imagined this 100 ways, and none of them fit the moment. Evelyn looked like the photograph had promised. Small, steady. But there was a gravity around her I hadn't earned the right to describe. I didn't know where to put my hands. I chose open on my knees. The mediator nodded to me. I told the story in order. No edits, no softening. I named what I planned, what I wanted, what I told myself, what I took. I said that the number on the restitution order meant 1,000 hours of future work, and that every hour would be an act of worship. I said I didn't expect forgiveness, that I didn't think forgiveness meant friendship, that I respected any boundary she needed. I said thank you for her statement because it had kept me from crawling back into lies. Evelyn spoke. She talked about fear and therapy, about walking different routes and learning the sound of her own breath again. She talked about her son and how children treat leftover fear like a math problem they can solve if they count carefully enough. Then she said she had forgiven me as an act of obedience to Jesus and self-protection from bitterness. She said forgiveness did not mean forgetting or trusting, that it did not cancel consequences, that it did not promise anything beyond this room. She said she prayed I would never make another person a chapter in my harm. I cried the way men try not to. Quiet, like something leaking. The mediator gave us both time. We ended with practicals. No contact after this, payment plan through the court, a final check that we understood the boundaries. When the door closed behind her, I sat with my hands still open. I whispered again, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Release day looked like a parking lot, and a sky I'd forgotten had this many blues. My mother was there in a dress she wore to every big day, good or terrible. We held each other without saying sorry again because we'd used the word properly so many times it had become a bridge instead of a broom. She took me to a small storefront church. Tito's description was perfect. Stained ceiling tiles. Songs that still went up. The pastor knew my name. Not the number. My name. They didn't hand me a microphone. They handed me a broom, a chair to stack, a spot in the back where I could learn how to pray with other people breathing next to me. I worked day labor at first, then warehouse nights. My check had 2 lines that felt like a vow: tithe and restitution. I wrote Evelyn's case number on my budget. I prayed over it like a man watering a field he once burned. On Wednesdays, the church hosted a recovery group and let me sit near the coffee until I could say a full sentence without trying to be impressive. On Saturdays, we cooked for folks who slept under the overpass. Service put my hands where my prayers said my heart was. One evening, the pastor asked if I would share a brief testimony at the jail service. The word brief did me a kindness. I prayed the tax collector's prayer again, then added another line I'd learned to trust. Matthew chapter 5, verse 44. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I didn't preach. I just told the truth in order, like in the mediation room, and then I said the sentence that had become the shape of my days. Forgiveness does not make me soft on consequences. It makes me soft to God. When I sat down, I felt something like peace. Not the dramatic kind, just the steady kind that keeps you from breaking what you're holding. I thought that would be the end of it, the telling, the small peace. But peace is a muscle that atrophies if you don't use it. The next week brought a test I didn't recognize until it had my collar. At the warehouse, a pallet jack clipped my ankle, and the kid pushing it didn't even look back. Later, I saw him slip a box cutter into his hoodie. I watched him pocket phone chargers 2 at a time. I felt the old prosecutor rise inside me, the one who used to indict the world so I didn't have to indict myself. The supervisor was a good man with tired eyes. He'd taken a chance on me after looking straight at my record. I wanted to keep that chance in perfect condition, untouched by trouble. I went to the break room and stared at the anonymous tip line number printed on a curling poster. I could say nothing. I could be the man who minds his own business. But that phrase had never been neutral in my life. It had been camouflage. I dialed and told the truth. Not to punish, to protect. When security checked cameras and pulled the kid aside, he looked at me like I'd set a trap. He hissed something I'd have said at his age. I stood still and let the supervisor do his job. I also asked later if the company had programs instead of just exits. They did. The kid took one. He didn't thank me. He didn't have to. I slept that night without rehearsing a lie. On Sundays, I learned the long obedience of being known. The pastor taught slow through the Gospels, not with footnotes, but with open hands. He would read a Jesus sentence, sit in its silence, and then ask, "What would this change if it were true in you?" The question followed me to work, into the bus aisle, through the checkout line, down to the corner where a woman in a blue coat once stood in my memory. Sometimes I saw that color across the street and my chest tightened like grief tugging its shoelaces. I practiced opening my hands until the ache learned a new shape. Restitution moved like a drip. Every pay period I wrote the number and pictured it traveling through a pipe I'd once clogged with selfishness. A caseworker from the DA's office sent periodic confirmations. Professional, brief, humane. There was a form update that included a strange gift. A line at the bottom stating that the victim had the right to check balance, to be informed, to give input. Seeing that sentence kept my compass steady. Forgiveness had visited my life like weather. Accountability stayed like climate. Therapy felt like learning to breathe without proving anything. The counselor had a quiet face and a way of asking, "What happened next?" that made excuses sound expensive. We went back to the kitchen door and the crack in the wood. We talked about anger like a smoke alarm. When it protects, when it malfunctions, how not to rip it out of the ceiling just to make the noise stop. I told him about the letter. He said forgiveness often arrives as a future you didn't think you deserved, asking if you'll walk into it one day at a time. He didn't rush me. He held me to definitions. Forgiveness is releasing revenge, he said. It is not releasing responsibility. The first time the chaplain asked me to speak in the jail again, I felt the old fraud alarm go off. Who was I to speak to men sitting where I had sat? I brought my notebook anyway. I wrote at the top of the page, "Tell the truth in order." When I stood in that familiar room, drop ceiling, scuffed linoleum, the same wooden cross sanded by the same kind of love, I felt the floor tilt with memory. I didn't preach. I told what happened, what I did, what I said to myself, the letter I received, the sentence I accepted. I quoted one line because it had become the spine that held my ribs up. Luke, chapter 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. I didn't pretend I understood all its edges. I said it like a beggar repeating bread words. A man in the front row, tattoos braided up his neck, raised his hand. So are you saying we should just let stuff slide? I shook my head. No, I'm saying hate will eat you even if you win. I'm saying tell the truth to the court. I'm saying ask God to hold the gavel you keep wanting back. He nodded once, like someone marking a page to find later. I met Tito for tacos the first Friday I could afford the luxury. He hugged me in a way men learn in places where hugs can be misread. Quick, firm, honest. He'd found steady work detailing cars and carried a key on a lanyard like a trophy from a fair fight. We talked about the men still inside and the volunteers who didn't treat us like projects. He asked about Evelyn without saying her name. I told him the facts the liaison allowed me to know. Payments current, boundaries respected, no further contact. He raised his soda and said, "To boundaries, then." We laughed, and it was the healthy kind. The small church started a weeknight group for people who carried either side of the justice system in their bodies. Victims, families, former offenders, cops who needed a room where their badge could rest on the table without covering their face. I only spoke when asked. Most nights, I just listened to pain-learned grammar. A woman described the way her porch light felt like armor after her assault. How she replaced the bulb every 2 weeks, even when it didn't burn out, because routine was a way to talk to fear. A retired officer described the weight of keys he still felt on his belt months after he turned them in. The group taught me what my crime had cost in currencies I hadn't counted. It also taught me that listening is not penance. It's participation in healing. One evening, a man I'd seen twice came in late, hat in hand, eyes like storm glass. His brother had been shot. "I want to find him," he said, meaning the shooter. The room went quiet like the second after a glass breaks. I felt my own temperature rise, that old volunteer prosecutor looking for a case. The pastor didn't give a speech. He asked the man to breathe. He put a paper and pen on the table. "Write every name you want to hold responsible," he said. "Put God's name at the top of the second page. Then decide which page can carry the weight you're asking it to carry." We prayed. The man's shoulders moved like hills as the weather changed. Grief doesn't obey our schedules, but sometimes it listens when you read its scripture. I whispered the tax collector's line under my breath. Luke, chapter 18, verse 13. "God, be merciful to me, a sinner." Months turned into a year. The restitution total shrank like winter, giving back daylight. I kept the last receipt in my Bible, not as a trophy, but as a boundary stone. Here, the Lord helped me. I asked the caseworker whether a final mediated contact was appropriate to confirm completion. The answer came back: no contact, Your payments are confirmation enough. I obeyed the sentence the way a sober man obeys his medicine. The pastor asked if I would mentor 2 younger guys after service. Nothing formal, just share a meal, answer straight when they ask crooked. One had hands that shook when angry. The other had a smile that tried to steal attention from his fear. We met at a diner where the coffee smelled like burnt hope, and the waitress called everyone Love like she had discovered their names were too heavy for weekdays. I didn't try to make them me. I told them how to make a budget that paid the future first. I told them the trick my counselor taught me for when rage claws the inside of your ribs. Cold water, slow breathing, adoration names. Say who God is out loud until your body remembers who you are. That spring, the church hosted a community night on forgiveness without abandoning justice. They asked me to plan the order of service and then, surprise, asked if I would give a short talk at the end. I wrote the 3 sentences that held me. Forgiveness releases revenge to God. It does not erase wisdom or suspend consequences. Mercy is personal. Justice is public. Then I put them in my pocket and didn't read them. I told the story in order again, but shorter, and watched faces move through skepticism into something else. Maybe not agreement, but attention. Attention is a kind of mercy when you've spent years talking to your own echo. On the anniversary of my release, I walked to the corner where I'd made the worst version of myself official. The liquor store still had bars on the windows. The pawn shop still held guitars that looked like promises. A woman in a blue coat crossed on the far side of the street. I didn't follow her with my eyes. I looked at the sky and said out loud so the street could be a witness, Lord Jesus, you have the gavel. Keep my hands open. On my way home, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. It was the volunteer with gray at his temples, the borrowed room guitar man. We're starting something, he said. A small circle for people ready to forgive but terrified they'll lose themselves doing it. Would you come? I said yes before fear could negotiate. I went because ache had once pulled me into a chapel, and obedience now pulled me into rooms where other people's ache needed a chair. I keep the first letter folded behind Luke in my Bible. Sometimes I take it out and read the careful loops again. I don't imagine what might have happened if there had been no letter. I live in the world where there was. When shame tries to rewrite my name, I speak another one aloud. Matthew, chapter 5, verse 44. Love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. I pray it for the kid at the warehouse, for the men still inside, for the version of me who still stands at that corner in some parallel life, for the woman in the blue coat who once gave me a future I didn't know how to ask for, and for the judge who is also a father, who holds the gavel and still runs down the road. I said yes to the circle because the ache I'd lived with taught me to recognize its cousins in other people. We met in the back classroom of the church, half moon of metal chairs, tissue box that traveled like a microphone. I didn't lead. I learned. A nurse whose hands had steadied strangers for 20 years spoke about a driver who ran a red light. A man in a paint-splattered hoodie whispered about a father who came back only when he needed money. A college kid clenched and unclenched his jaw, talking about a roommate who stole his laptop and his thesis with it. We named the wounds without spin, and then tried to hand the gavel to God. When I didn't know what to say, I prayed the short prayers out loud. Luke, chapter 18, verse 13. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. Because mercy felt like oxygen someone had to open the window for. I kept working nights. Forklifts sighed, tape guns sang their sticky hymns. The intercom coughed orders that sounded like weather advisories. I liked the rhythm because it was unromantic and honest. Stack, scan, sweep, ship. Sometimes I'd catch myself humming the jailhouse chapel songs. On break, I read the Gospels with a battered pencil, circling verbs like a man learning to drive. Come, follow, forgive, render, pray, go. I didn't try to master them. I let them master me a day at a time. My mother's health wobbled that winter. High blood pressure, small dizzy spells that scared her more than she let on. I sat with her in waiting rooms where the air smelled like sanitizer and Sunday. I made soup that tasted like the one she made when Rent ate our groceries. We didn't rehearse the old pain every visit. We sat in its presence like you sit with an old neighbor you don't invite inside anymore. One afternoon, while I was fixing a cabinet hinge, she touched the splintered place on the kitchen door with 2 fingers and said, "Maybe we keep it." To remember what God can sand. I swallowed my apology because we had already built that bridge. I handed her the screwdriver because sometimes love is as simple as letting someone hold the tool that once felt too heavy. I had not forgiven my father because I had not found him. He had the gift of disappearing, the kind men learn when they're allergic to their own shame. A letter came with no return address. Familiar crooked letters like he'd written on my birthday once, and then missed the next 10. He asked for money in the 2nd paragraph and forgiveness in the 3rd, and I'm not proud of how quickly I wanted to swap the order. I took the letter to the pastor. He didn't say, "Of course, send it," and he didn't say, "Of course, don't." He said, "What would forgiving him change in you? And what would sending money change in him?" I wrote 2 lists. Forgiving him would change my posture. Sending money might feed his pattern. I wrote him back with the firmness I was learning. "I forgive you. I'm praying for you. I won't fund your vanishing. If you want help, meet me at church on Thursday at 6. He didn't come. I forgave him again the next Thursday. I still look at the door sometimes when I make coffee and say, "Lord, I release revenge. I retain responsibility." News finds you even when you don't go looking. One evening after work, the TV was on at the diner, and a clip of a memorial played. A widow stating with a steady voice that she forgave the man accused of killing her husband. The room tried to keep eating like nothing had happened, but forks paused. I felt the old offense and the new awe hold hands in my chest. I thought of Evelyn's careful loops and how public her mercy had been in a small room with a clock. I paid my bill, left a tip like gratitude, and walked out under a sky that didn't know where to put all that ache. I prayed for the widow, for the accused, for the courts, and for the watchers like me who now had no excuse to pretend the gospel was only a theory for quiet people. A week later, I was walking home when I saw an old friend drifting at the edge of the bus stop, light like a moth. Rudy, who taught me how to turn a quick buck when we were teenagers, and then turned quick bucks into a lifestyle. He grinned like a man trying on a mask he wasn't sure still fit. "Danny boy," he said, like the nickname could unlock a door that no longer existed. He pitched me a job that smelled like my past. I didn't preach. I said no twice. Once out loud to him, and once inside where the old appetites sit with their napkins tucked in. "I've got a broom to push and a life to lose if I'm stupid," I said. "I can get you a shift sweeping with me." He laughed like I'd told the joke wrong. I wrote my number down. He didn't call. I prayed for him anyway, because I have learned prayer is me refusing to let the darkness pick my friends without a fight. Restorative justice invited me back, not as a participant, but as a chair filler with a story-shaped tool set. They trained me to listen like a bridge, to stop people from trying to build a friendship over a chasm. Only trust can cross slowly, to keep recentering safety, to anchor on boundaries the way a sailor checks his knots before sleep. The first night I sat in with a teen who'd carjacked someone, and a man who had rebuilt his sense of street by street only to have it stolen at a light. The teen spoke in sentences that sounded like he was trying on remorse to see if it fit. The man spoke like every word cost a part of the night he lost. We didn't aim for a miracle. We aimed for truth in order. When the session ended, the man asked for nothing from the kid. He asked the court for something from the system. Programs, tutoring, a mentor, community service that taught rather than humiliated. I watched a new kind of strength and wrote it down in my chest. Forgiveness can ask for consequences shaped like futures. I kept paying. The day the restitution balance hit zero, the caseworker's letter came with the cool tone of official closure, and I cried like I'd been handed a certificate no one would ever frame. I took it to the pastor, and I didn't put me on stage. He put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Altars can be small." I slid the letter behind Luke, where the first letter lived. I breathed a thank you I couldn't fit in English. Spring crawled toward summer. The church asked me to help lead a Saturday cleanup on a block that looked tired of being talked about. We swept glass, painted fences, trimmed a hedge that had spent a decade minding only its business. A boy on a scooter asked why we were doing chores for a street. I said, "Because you live here." And then realized I was talking to myself too. One evening after the cleanup, I took the bus 2 neighborhoods over and got off 3 stops early, so I could walk past the quiet street where I had once stolen a purse and a piece I didn't own. The air smelled like jasmine and car exhaust. I didn't expect to see her, but I did. A glimpse of a blue coat at the end of the block bending to pick a few herbs from a planter. I didn't change my path. I didn't slow down. I said nothing. I looked at the concrete. I prayed one sentence for her and one for me. For her, "Lord, keep her safe." For me, "Keep me small." The circle at church grew. A man whose daughter had been hurt by someone she trusted came for the first time and sat in the back like a door propped open just in case. When it was his turn, he didn't tell the story. He told us what every day felt like now. How he checked the locks twice. How he wanted to buy a dog big enough to eat a man. How he couldn't say the offender's name without tasting metal. He asked if forgiving would make him a bad father. I said the sentence that had taken me 1,000 days to learn. Forgiving won't make you a bad father. It might make you a father who sleeps again. Because you'll let God stand where vengeance keeps trying to stand in your chest. He didn't nod. He came back the next week, which is its own kind of yes. I still fail. Some days my mouth outruns my mercy. Some days I choose the cold silence that used to be my religion. On those days, I go back to the verbs. Come, follow, forgive, render, pray, go. I recite the line that began to rewire me in a cell. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And then I put my hands where my prayers say my heart is. On a broom, on a budget, on a shoulder that needs steadiness more than advice, on a door hinge that once told a story of damage and now holds a story about repair. I kept showing up because I had learned that faithfulness is just obedience done on repeat. The circle, the broom, the budget, the bus stop prayer. Little stitches that with time hold a life together. The pastor asked if I'd consider baptism. I had avoided the question because water felt too simple for what I'd done. But one Sunday, the sermon hung on Jesus' words about coming and following, and I felt like a man standing on a dock arguing with a boat he already needed to board. The next week, behind our little church, they set a plastic trough beneath a sky that looked like mercy washed and hung to dry. I told the truth in 2 minutes. Who I'd been, who found me, who I'm following, and went under. It wasn't bright lights and angel choirs. It was a funeral and a first breath. I came up shivering and laughing at once, and my mother cried the slow kind of tears that repair. Not every invitation felt gentle. A cousin posted my mugshot with a caption about wolves in church clothes. A stranger messaged that I was faking it for clout. I started typing a defense with the speed of a man trying to outrun his old shadow. Then I remembered the verbs. I erased the paragraph, set my phone down, and washed dishes until my pulse believed me. I prayed for the cousin by name and for the stranger without one. I asked God to make me dull to insult and sharp to my own sin. I still walked past the corner sometimes, not to punish myself, to remember I have an address now that isn't my worst moment. On one of those walks, a patrol car rolled slow and the officer inside nodded. A human nod, not a cop one. He was the retired officer from our weeknight group, riding along to keep a promise to himself about staying connected without staying inside. "You doing all right?" he said through the open window. "I am," I answered. "Most days." He pointed at my open hands on the strap of my backpack. "Keep them that way," he said. I did. Evelyn remained a boundary and a blessing. No contact, clear lines, a paid debt that will always be more than money. When I prayed for her, I sometimes pictured a porch light that never burned out, a boy whose street felt like a street again, and a kitchen with a door that stays on its hinges. I thanked God for the careful loops of her letter and for the fact that forgiveness did not become a headline in my story. It became a habit. The church asked if I would help start a Forgive and Tell the Truth class. 8 weeks, short readings from the Gospels, practices for anger, safety plans, and a session with a legal aid who explained what cooperation actually looks like. We wrote our anchor lines on the board every week until even the quiet people could say them by heart. Forgive freely. Testify truthfully. Mercy is personal. Justice is public. Release revenge, not responsibility. A soft heart doesn't mean soft on crime. People came who had been hurt, people who had done harm, and people who weren't sure which category they fit in most. We kept our eyes on Jesus and our feet on the ground. Halfway through the first cohort, Rudy texted me after months of silence. "You still got that broom job?" I did. He showed up with a haircut that looked like an apology and eyes that wouldn't stop scanning exits. We worked side by side in the warehouse, and I watched him fight the invisible war I knew too well. When he cursed under his breath, I didn't flinch. When he wanted to take an extra smoke break, I handed him a pallet instead. When he asked about the water behind the church, I said, "It's for funerals and first breaths." He laughed like he might cry. "Not yet," he said. "Okay," I said. "I'll hold a towel." Mom's dizzy spells subsided after the doctors adjusted a dose, and after I learned how to cook food that was less about nostalgia and more about not dying young. She came to the circle one night and sat where I could see her hands. When it was her turn, she didn't tell my story. She told hers, of holding a son with a siren in his chest, of sanding a door instead of replacing it, of praying 1,000 prayers that sounded like one. When she finished, the nurse in the group reached over and squeezed her hand. We passed the tissue box like communion. The DA's office invited me to a small training for volunteers on a program that helps victims write impact statements and helps offenders hear them like human beings instead of sentencing math. I sat in the back at first, learning how to keep the room safe, how to stop a session that turned into fresh harm, how to recognize when someone was ready for the conversation, and when not yet was holy. The lead facilitator, an older woman with teacher eyes, asked me to role-play both sides on different days so new volunteers could practice. I walked back into my old posture in careful doses so others didn't have to learn by bleeding. Afterward, I'd sit in the empty hallway and pray the line that has kept me from drowning. God, be merciful to me, a sinner. My nightmares didn't disappear. They got shorter. When I woke sweating, I put my feet on the floor and said the verbs out loud. Come, follow, forgive, render, pray, go. The rhythm slowed my breath. Sometimes I'd text Tito a single word, awake, and he'd send back, yep, and we'd exchange 2 scriptures like men swapping flashlights in a tunnel. There was one more meeting I didn't plan. At a citywide service project, our church partnered with another congregation to repaint a rec center. I was taping baseboards when a woman's voice behind me said, "Blue is a forgiving color." I turned too fast and almost tore the tape. It wasn't Evelyn. It was the volunteer from my jail days, the one with gray at his temples, arm in arm with his wife, both holding paint trays. We laughed about the early songs in the borrowed room and traded the kind of small stories that carry large gratitude. "You know," he said, "there's a boy in our youth group who reminds me of you. Fast legs, slow wisdom. Will you talk to him sometime?" I said yes, because somebody said yes to me when I wasn't yet saying yes to God. The boy met me in the church gym with a basketball that sounded like a heartbeat on varnished wood. He talked about a fight brewing and a dare someone texted him. Video it or you're not in. I didn't lecture. I told him about the day I paid the future with a lie and the day a letter paid me back with a chance. We ran a few games to 5, and I let him win 2 before I played like I meant it. He grinned like he'd found a reason to sleep. Years from my first letter, and a little while after the last restitution receipt, the pastor asked if I would share on a Sunday. Not to fill time, but to make a path. I stood where he usually stood and looked at the 100 faces I knew like landmarks. I told the truth in order. I named the verbs. I quoted the sentence that rebuilt my mouth. Luke chapter 23, verse 34. "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." I said that forgiveness had not erased consequence. It had erased my claim to vengeance. I said that justice had not caved to sentiment. It had stood taller because sentiment wasn't holding it up. I said that if anyone needed help doing both, releasing revenge and cooperating with truth, we had chairs for that. After the service, a line formed the way lines do when people have been carrying things alone for years. I didn't hurry them. I shook hands, pointed folks toward counselors, wrote phone numbers, and promised prayers I meant to keep. When the last person walked away, the sanctuary was almost empty. I sat on the front step with my mother while the light leaked out of the day. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. I looked at the door behind us, solid on its hinges. I still have a story to tell tomorrow, because following Jesus keeps turning pages. But if you've walked with me this far, you know the ending that fits my beginning. I am not the man I was. I am not yet the man I will be. I am held between by a mercy that refuses to run out.